Our poor girl sits alone during recess. The young billionaire approaches and asks why she isn't eating. She smiles and says, "I pretend I'm not hungry. That way no one notices I don't have a snack." He opens her backpack and starts to cry when he sees only a napkin with a pencil-drawn sandwich. The clock on the car's dashboard read 10:32 a.m. When John Warren parked his black Audi in front of Hillside Public School. He adjusted his grey tie more out of habit than necessity, then took a deep breath. Philanthropic visits were not his forte, especially on a busy Tuesday. 20 minutes, he muttered to himself. I'll shake a few hands, take pictures with the kids, sign the check and leave. His company's board had insisted on these public appearances. Humanize your image, they said. As if 30 years spent building a tech empire from scratch weren't enough proof of his worth. The principal was waiting for him at the entrance, her smile too wide, eyes gleaming with the expectation of zeros on the check he would bring. John greeted her with a firm handshake and a rehearsed smile. Perfect for photos. Mr. Warren, what an honor. The children are so excited. John nodded, following her down a hallway lined with children's artwork. His mind drifted between an unanswered email about an acquisition in Asia and the investor meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock. Our library urgently needs new computers and the kitchen. The principal's voice became a distant buzz as they passed classrooms. Children watched him curiously or with indifference. Some waved. John waved back automatically, his neutral expression masking his discomfort. He was good at hiding, good at keeping distance, great at writing checks for social causes without ever getting involved with them. Money solved problems without creating attachments. It was perfect that way. The visit went exactly as expected until they reached the schoolyard. It was recess time. "We can go this way, Mr. Warren. I want to show you where we plan to build." That's when he saw her. In the farthest corner of the yard, almost hidden by the shade of a solitary tree, a girl with curly brown hair was sitting alone. She wasn't running like the others, not yelling, not taking part in the usual recess bustle. She just watched the other kids, holding her faded little backpack. John stopped walking, ignoring the principal who kept talking about renovation plans. Something about that child's loneliness completely seized his attention. "Mr. Warren, who is that girl?" John asked, discreetly pointing. The principal followed his gaze, and her expression changed subtly. A shadow of sadness crossed her face. "Sophie, one of our more delicate situations." John moved away from the principal without replying, walking toward the girl as if pulled by an invisible magnet. Sophie watched him approach, her big eyes showing a mix of curiosity and caution. "Why aren't you eating?" John asked kindly, kneeling down to her eye level. The question hung in the air for a few seconds. Sophie studied the stranger in the expensive suit, who had interrupted her solitude. Then, surprisingly, she smiled, a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I pretend I'm not hungry," she answered with disarming simplicity. "That way nobody notices I don't have a snack." Her words hit John like a physical blow. He looked at the backpack she clutched against her chest. "May I see?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophie hesitated briefly before unzipping the worn backpack. John looked inside and felt his eyes burn instantly. At the bottom of the empty backpack, there was only a white napkin with a pencil drawing of a sandwich. Careful childlike strokes outlined 2 slices of bread, some leaves that looked like lettuce, and something that might be cheese or ham in between. It was a detailed drawing, made with the careful effort of someone who truly tried to capture the essence of something she longed for. John felt a tear slip out before he could hold it back, then another, and another. He turned his face away quickly, but it was too late. The wall holding his emotions in check had completely broken down. Sophie looked at John with an expression of confusion and concern, like she, a small child, was worried about the adult who was crying. "Are you sad?" she asked, tilting her head slightly to the side. John took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. He wiped the tears quickly with the back of his hand, staining the sleeve of his expensive jacket. "No," he lied, forcing a smile. "Something just got in my eye." He carefully picked up the napkin as if it were a precious relic. The principal watched the scene from a distance, visibly uncomfortable with the deviation from her perfectly scripted tour. "Why did you draw this?" he asked softly. Sophie shrugged, a gesture too adult for someone so small. "When I draw, it feels real. At least a little bit." John felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just physical hunger that drawing represented. It was the ability to turn absence into something beautiful. The resilience of a child who found dignity, even when the world denied her the basics. "You know," John said, feeling words leave his mouth without his usual filter. "I used to draw my lunch when I was a kid, too." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. But yours is way better than mine." A tiny smile appeared on her lips, shy like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. The principal finally came closer, unsettled by the detour in her schedule. "Mr. Warren, we need to continue. We have the computer lab to visit and—" "What's her situation?" John interrupted, not taking his eyes off Sophie, who was again toying with her paper lunch. The principal hesitated. "We can discuss that later, in private." The principal finally approached, clearing her throat. "Mr. Warren, we need to continue. We have the computer lab to visit and—" "Of course," John replied, gently returning the napkin to Sophie. His eyes met hers one last time. "Keep drawing. You've got talent." Sophie took back her paper treasure and nodded solemnly. "Thank you," she said simply. John stood up, straightened his jacket and followed the principal. But something had changed. Each step that took him away from the girl felt wrong, like swimming against the current. The feeling was bothersome and inexplicable. For the rest of the visit, he smiled at the right moments, asked appropriate questions, and signed the generous check. But his mind kept returning to the corner of the yard, under the solitary tree, to the napkin with a pencil-drawn sandwich. In the car on the way to his next appointment, John found himself thinking about Sophie's mother, a woman who leaves early for work, leaving her daughter without a snack, without time or resources for something as basic as feeding her own child. The image of the napkin with the drawn sandwich wouldn't leave his mind, the silent dignity in the girl's eyes, the naturalness with which she turned hunger into art, as if it were normal, as if it were acceptable. John adjusted the rearview mirror and saw his own reflection. The same man as always, yet somehow different in a way he couldn't explain. The lump in his throat didn't match his impeccable suit. The restlessness in his chest clashed with his meticulously planned routine. On his phone, a notification about his investors' meeting blinked insistently. He ignored it, something he would never have done on a normal day. But this was not a normal day. For the first time in a long while, something other than contracts and acquisitions occupied his thoughts. A small child, alone under the shade of a tree, pretending to eat a pencil-drawn sandwich. It was a strange feeling, almost forgotten, caring. Night was long for John Warren. He tossed and turned for hours, haunted by the image of Sophie and her drawn sandwich. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of crying napkins and invisible children. By 6 in the morning, he was already up. His usual morning ritual brought him no comfort. The perfect coffee from his $5,000 Italian machine tasted bitter. The news on his tablet seemed irrelevant. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like a stranger's. He cancelled 3 meetings and a video conference with Japanese investors. His assistant, a competent woman who had worked with him for 6 years, could not hide her surprise. "Are you sick, Mr. Warren?" "No, I have a personal matter to attend to." Personal. A word he rarely used. His tech empire was his life. There was nothing personal beyond those walls of glass and steel. Until yesterday. He drove to the best bakery in town. The place was famous for its artisanal breads and gourmet sandwiches. A line formed at the door every day. "Good morning, sir." "What would you like today?" asked the cashier with a practiced smile. "I need—" John paused. What exactly did he need? A sandwich for a child. But not just any sandwich. It had to be perfect. It had to be real. "I want the best sandwich you have for a kid. We have our kids' club sandwich with organic smoked turkey, Swiss cheese, and—" "No," John interrupted. "Something more ordinary. Something any child would like." The cashier seemed confused. Customers like John Warren, in expensive suits and luxury cars, usually asked for the most exclusive items, the rarest ingredients, the most sophisticated combinations. Maybe a grilled cheese. Kids love that. Perfect. And one more thing, he added. I need a bag. 20 minutes later, John parked 2 blocks from Hillside Public School. In his hands was a simple paper bag. Inside it, a grilled cheese wrapped in wax paper, a red apple, a juice box, and a small chocolate. He waited. He needed to see Sophie alone, without the embarrassment caused by the principal or other adults. There would be questions, explanations. He wasn't ready for that. The bell rang, indicating recess. John took a deep breath. His heart beat strangely. Was it nervousness? He, who closed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, felt clammy hands because of a grilled cheese sandwich. Children began pouring into the yard in noisy groups. John searched for the curly-haired Sophie among them. Nothing. Maybe she hadn't come today, maybe. Then he saw her. Same tree as yesterday, same isolated spot, same faded backpack, sitting alone, like a solitary planet orbiting far from the other children. John crossed the yard, trying to appear casual, as if he belonged there. Some staff members watched him suspiciously, but no one approached. Maybe his expensive suit suggested a certain authority. "Hi, Sophie," he said as he got close. She looked up, surprised. Recognition lit her face for an instant, before giving way to caution. "Hi," she answered simply. "May I sit here?" Sophie nodded, studying him curiously. John sat down next to her, setting the bag between them. "I brought this for you," he said kindly, gently pushing the bag her way. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight of the bag. She peeked inside, as if she were peering at a treasure. "You can open it. It's yours," John said, opening the bag to show its contents. The smell of melted cheese filled the air between them. Sophie took a deep breath, her eyes sparkling. John noticed she tried to hide her reaction, as if showing enthusiasm might be dangerous. "You can take whatever you want," he said. Sophie looked around, checking if anyone was watching, then reached for the sandwich. Her small fingers touched the wax paper with reverence. She held the sandwich with both hands, as if it were something extremely fragile. John had never paid so much attention to someone eating. Each bite seemed like an event, each expression of pleasure a small miracle. But then, after 3 bites, Sophie stopped. She looked at the sandwich, then at John, then back at the sandwich. "Can I save a piece for my mom?" The question hit John like a slap. It wasn't just the request itself, but how it was asked. Without drama, without self-pity, just a child thinking of sharing what she had with someone she loved. John swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. It had been years since he allowed himself that kind of emotion in public, or even in private. "Of course. Let's save half for her." Sophie smiled, a genuine smile this time, lighting up her entire face. Carefully, she folded the wax paper around the uneaten half of the sandwich and put it into her backpack. "My mom works a lot," she explained, as if she needed to justify. "Sometimes she forgets to eat too." John felt something break inside him. It wasn't just physical hunger that worried him now. It was the invisible hunger, the hunger for care, for dignity, for stability. A mom who worked so hard she forgot to eat. A small daughter who thought of others first, even when she had so little. How many Sophies were at that school, in the city, in the world? How many children drew their lunch while billionaires like him worried about mergers and acquisitions? "Your mom must be really happy when you bring her things," John commented, offering the apple. Sophie took the fruit, examining its bright red surface. "She cries sometimes," she said with the brutal honesty of children. "She says she wishes it wasn't like this." John felt the weight of those simple words. There was a whole universe of unspoken struggles in that sentence. "What's her name?" "Rachel," Sophie replied, biting into the apple with satisfaction. "Rachel Blake." Rachel Blake. A name for the face he hadn't yet seen. The mother who worked so hard she forgot to eat. The mother who cried when her daughter shared with her. "Sophie, I have to go now," John said, standing. You can keep the bag and the rest of the food, okay? To save some for your mom, too." The girl's eyes shone with excitement. "Really? I can keep everything?" "Sure. It's all yours now." Sophie hugged the bag against her chest, as though John had just given her a priceless treasure. And maybe he had, he realized, not for the objects themselves, but for what they represented. The promise that tomorrow there would be food. The small but real security of having something of her own. "Thank you," she said with a seriousness that felt out of place in someone so young. "You're nice." John smiled, feeling something unfamiliar in his chest, a warmth he couldn't identify, a lightness that didn't match the weight of his usual responsibilities. "See you soon, Sophie." As he walked away, John knew he couldn't just go back to his life as it was before. The real sandwich had replaced the pencil-drawn one, but the real hunger, the hunger for justice, was now his own. With determined steps, John crossed the yard where children ran and shouted. Some watched him curiously. A man in an expensive suit walking among them seemed out of place, but John barely noticed the looks. His mind was focused on a single thought. He needed to learn more about Sophie and her mother, Rachel Blake. What had started as an impulsive gesture was transforming into something deeper, more meaningful. Entering the main building, John followed the signs for the principal's office. Each step took him further from his comfort zone, from the world where he controlled everything. Each step brought him closer to unfamiliar territory, where real people's stories, like Sophie's and Rachel's, would demand more from him than just money. "May I help you?" asked the secretary as he stopped in front of her desk. "I need to speak with Principal Marlene Carter," John replied in the same tone he used when closing important deals. Now, Principal Marlene Carter made John wait exactly 7 minutes. He counted each second on the wall clock while the secretary gave him anxious glances. For a man used to meetings that started when he arrived, that little display of bureaucratic power was irritating, but also necessary, he realized. He was on her turf now. When the door finally opened, Marlene Carter appeared with a cautious expression. Her red-framed glasses hung from a chain around her neck, and she placed them on to take a better look at her unexpected visitor. "Mr. Warren, I didn't expect to see you so soon after your official visit. Did something happen?" John entered the small but impeccably organized office. On the walls were educational certificates and graduation photos. On the desk, a well-tended plant and a mug with the phrase, "Teaching is planting seeds of knowledge." "I want to talk about Sophie Blake," John said, without beating around the bush. The principal gestured for him to take a seat in front of her, and then sat down. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What exactly do you want to know?" There was a defensive note in her voice that surprised John, as if she were preparing to protect the child from something or someone, from him, maybe. "I noticed she doesn't have a snack, that she draws food on a napkin," John replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I'd like to understand her situation." Marlene sighed, removing her glasses. The gesture seemed like a ritual to buy time, to decide how much to reveal. "Mr. Warren, we have many children in difficult situations at this school. Sophie is just one of them. I'm asking specifically about her." The principal studied John's face for a few seconds, as if assessing his intentions. "Why? What does she mean to you?" The question caught him off guard. What did Sophie mean to him? She was a child drawing sandwiches on a napkin, a little girl who saved half a sandwich for her mother. A reminder that his world of meetings and acquisitions was absurdly far from the reality of millions of people. "I saw her," he answered simply, "and now I can't ignore her." Something in the raw honesty of his answer seemed to convince the principal. She put her glasses back on and opened a drawer, pulling out a thin folder. "Rachel Blake is a single mother. Sophie never met her father. He vanished when Rachel got pregnant. They were doing okay until Rachel lost her job 8 months ago, when the company she worked for as an administrative assistant closed down." John listened carefully as the principal turned a page in the folder. "Rachel doesn't have a degree. She's worked since she was 16 to help her own mother, who passed away last year. With no specific qualifications, no time for courses, and no family support network, the math is simple and cruel. And now she does house cleaning whenever she can find work, temporary gigs, Sometimes as a grocery clerk, sometimes as a waitress. Nothing permanent, nothing that pays enough. Marlene closed the folder. But she's proud. She refuses direct assistance. She accepted Sophie's spot here because education is crucial, but she's declined our offer twice to include the girl in the free meal program. John frowned. Why? Because some people would rather go hungry than feel like they're receiving charity, the principal said with a mixture of frustration and admiration. Rachel believes she can solve this on her own, that it's just a temporary phase. Is it? Marlene took off her glasses again. When she spoke, her voice lost its earlier formality. In my experience, Mr. Warren, these temporary phases have a terrible way of becoming permanent, especially for overburdened women like Rachel, who have no one to watch their kids while they look for work, who don't have time to retrain, who can't afford to get sick even for a day. John felt a knot forming in his throat. The reality of Rachel and Sophie condensed into a thin folder on an office desk, entire lives reduced to a few paragraphs of hardship. Where do they live? The principal hesitated. Mr. Warren, I'm not sure what your intentions are, but I'm not here to judge or to feel superior for helping, John interrupted. I want to understand. That's all. Marlene studied him again. Then she wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to him. 1422 Maple Street, apartment 3B. It's an old building on the east side. Not far from here, but far enough from your world. John took the paper, the principal's neat handwriting detailing an address that might as well be on another planet, considering the distance between his reality and Rachel's. Any advice? He asked, pocketing the address. Marlene smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Yes, don't wear that suit. John looked down at his $3,000 outfit that felt like a second skin. And one more thing, the principal continued, her tone now softer. Don't expect gratitude. Rachel is a woman fighting to keep her dignity intact, even when everything else is falling apart around her. What she needs is not a savior. Then what does she need? That, Mr. Warren, only she can tell you. John stood, offering his hand. Thank you for your honesty. The principal accepted the handshake. Just one more question, she said as he headed for the door. Why Sophie? Why not any other of the dozens of children with similar stories? John paused at the door, thinking. The image of the napkin with the drawn sandwich came back to his mind. Because she turned hunger into art, he finally replied, and because I was looking at the right moment. As he left the school, John already knew what he would do next. He wasn't going back to his glass and steel office in the penthouse downtown. He wouldn't return to his minimalist apartment overlooking the park. He would drive to 1422 Maple Street, not to save Rachel and Sophie, as the principal feared, but to understand what it meant to draw your lunch on a napkin and still save half a real sandwich for your mother. To understand how it felt to live in a world where hunger wasn't just about food, but about opportunities, about safety, about a future that wasn't just surviving one day at a time. In the car, he loosened his tie and took off his jacket. A small step out of his comfort zone, a step that, though he didn't know it yet, would completely change the course of his life. The building on Maple Street had no elevator. John climbed 3 flights of stairs, inhaling the smell of food, life, and hardships that filled the air. The peeling walls held stories he would never fully know. On the 3rd floor, he looked for apartment 3B. He hesitated before knocking. For the first time in years, he felt completely out of place. Even in jeans and a simple shirt, he knew he didn't belong here. 3 soft knocks, footsteps on the other side. The door opened just enough to reveal part of a face, wary brown eyes, hair in a makeshift bun. Yes, the voice was firm, though tired. Rachel Blake? John asked, trying not to sound like the executive he was. My name is John Warren. I met your daughter, Sophie, at school. The eyes narrowed further. You're not a teacher. It was not a question. No, John hesitated. How could he explain what had brought him here? May I speak with you for a minute? It's about Sophie. Mentioning her daughter's name had an immediate effect. The door opened wider, revealing Rachel fully. A woman of medium height with deep shadows under her eyes and rough hands from hard work. She wore simple pants and a faded t-shirt. No makeup, no accessories, just the raw beauty of someone who had no time for appearances. Did something happen to her? The concern was palpable. No, Sophie is fine. Are you from social services? Rachel crossed her arms defensively. Because I already told them we're fine. I'm not from social services, John replied, feeling more and more out of his element. I visited Sophie's school the other day. I saw her at recess. Rachel continued to watch him, waiting for the rest of his explanation. John took a deep breath. She was drawing a sandwich on a napkin. Rachel's face changed instantly. The defensive barrier gave way to something more complex. Shame, maybe, or wounded pride. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. You're the man who gave her the snack, she finally said, recognition in her voice. Sophie told me. She said it was her best day in a long time. A heavy silence settled between them. Would you like to come in? Rachel finally asked, her tone mixing courtesy and resignation, as if she were used to people coming to evaluate her life. The apartment was small but clean. Few pieces of furniture, all used but well cared for, a table with 3 chairs, a couch with a folded blanket over the back, a shelf with children's books and some handmade toys. On the wall, Sophie's drawings in makeshift frames made of colored cardboard. May I offer you some coffee? Rachel asked, heading to the tiny kitchen. It's the only thing I can offer visitors. Coffee would be great. Thank you. While she prepared the drink, John noticed more details. The old fridge making a strange noise, the window with a mended curtain, a vase with paper flowers, meticulously folded, likely by Sophie, poverty with dignity, daily struggle with beauty. Rachel returned with 2 chipped mugs, one with a flower design, the other with what seemed to be a faded cartoon character. Sugar? No, thank you. They sat at the table, the mugs between them like small shields. So, Rachel began, looking him straight in the eye. Why did you come here exactly? The frankness of the question caught John off guard. In his experience, people rarely spoke so directly to him. To understand, he answered honestly. Understand what? How a child ends up having to draw her food. Rachel took a sip of coffee, her eyes never leaving his. I didn't invite you here to feel sorry for us, Mr. John, just John, please. Well, John, we don't need pity. Or handouts. The word handouts came out loaded, as if it tasted bitter on her tongue. I'm not offering any of that, John replied. I just wanted to get to know you better. Rachel let out a dry laugh. People like you usually aren't interested in people like us, unless it's for a charity event that looks good on social media. John felt the sting of her words, but didn't look away. You don't know me. And you don't know me. You don't know anything about raising a daughter alone, not knowing if you'll pay next month's rent. Silence fell again. John took a sip of coffee. It was strong and bitter, lacking the smoothness of the specialty coffee he drank every morning. You're right, he admitted finally. I don't know anything about your life. That's why I'm here. Rachel studied his face, looking for signs of dishonesty or condescension. What do you want to know? She asked at last. What's your day like? The simple question seemed to disarm her. Rachel blinked, as if she had expected something else. My day? Yes, from start to finish. Rachel hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. I wake up at 5. I make a snack for Sophie when we have enough food. I leave her with the neighbor who takes her to school. Then I take 3 buses to the house I'm cleaning that day. When I find work, I clean, do laundry, iron. Sometimes I watch other people's kids. Then I take more buses, pick up Sophie from school or the neighbor's place. I cook whatever we have, help her with her homework, read to her before bed. She paused, staring at her mug. And we pray we can do it all again the next day. The simplicity of her description spoke volumes. John could feel the weight behind each word, the exhaustion beneath the routine. And when there's no work, Rachel's face hardened. I look for it. I knock on doors, fill out applications, hear no for an answer. And I try not to let Sophie see how scared I am. John nodded, taking in the raw reality of her words. Do you know what's worse than hunger, John? Rachel continued, her voice low but intense. Silence. The silence that screams when you have no choices. When every door you knock on stays closed. When your value is measured only by what you can pay. She took the last sip of her coffee. Sophie draws food because I want her to believe things will get better, that this lack is temporary, that the world has room for her dreams, even when our fridge is empty. John felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates moving. The woman before him didn't want his pity. She wanted to be seen, heard, respected in her daily fight. "What do you need, Rachel?" he finally asked. She looked at him with a strength that surprised him. "I don't need you to fix my life, or to feel good about helping a poor single mother. I need a decent job, time to be with my daughter. A little peace so I don't have to choose between paying the electric bill or buying food." She took a deep breath. "I need respect, not charity." The words hung in the air like a challenge to the simplistic view that money alone could fix everything. John simply nodded, finally understanding the gulf between giving handouts and offering dignity. When he left the small apartment an hour later, he carried with him the bitter taste of coffee and an even more bitter certainty. All his wealth meant little compared to the quiet courage of a mother who drew the future for her daughter, even when she could barely guarantee the present. In the car, before starting the engine, John looked at the old building. Somewhere inside, Rachel was probably already back to her routine, unaware she had just drastically changed the life of a billionaire who once believed he had seen everything. He needed to do more, not to feel good about himself, not to flaunt charity, but because, for the first time in a long while, he saw the world as it really was, a place where drawing a sandwich on a napkin could be both an act of despair and an act of hope. John couldn't sleep that night. Sitting in his glass-walled office overlooking the city lights, he turned ideas over in his mind, like someone flipping stones in search of something valuable. Coffee no longer helped. The deafening silence of the apartment only amplified Rachel's words. "I need respect, not charity." The financial reports that usually consumed his late-night hours stayed unopened. In their place lay a white napkin on which he'd hesitantly drawn a sandwich himself, an awkward attempt to understand Sophie's gesture. When the sun came up, coloring the city with gold, John already had a plan. It wouldn't be simple. It wouldn't just be about opening his checkbook and feeling virtuous. It had to be real, with roots, something that changed lives, not just fed people, something that offered dignity, not just food. Principal Marlene Carter got his call at 8:17 a.m. "Mr. Warren, is everything all right? We need to talk about a project," he said, his voice carrying the urgency of a sleepless night. "Today, if possible." "What kind of project? One that starts with meals but doesn't end there?" Marlene listened to the rest of his explanation in silence. When John finished, there was a long pause. "You understand that projects like this often fail, right?" she finally said. "Wealthy people get bored. The initial excitement fades, and the kids end up with nothing again. It won't be like that this time." "How can I be sure?" "You can't," John admitted. "But ask yourself, which is better? Trying something that might help a lot of kids and possibly failing, or not trying at all?" Another pause. "My office, noon." The meeting wasn't just with Marlene. John found a small team waiting for him. The school counselor, the district nutritionist, and 2 teachers, one of whom, he noticed, was Sophie's teacher. This wasn't a billionaire dictating terms to public employees. It was a real negotiation with people who understood that reality far better than he did. "We don't just want a better cafeteria," John explained after the introductions. "We want a complete program, daily meals, yes, but also creative workshops after school, a space where parents can participate, a place that goes beyond the classroom walls." Sophie's teacher, a young woman named Elisa, crossed her arms. "What's your real motivation, Mr. Warren?" "Philanthropy for your company's annual report, a project to impress investors with social responsibility, or something more personal?" Marlene gave the teacher a warning look, but John raised his hand. "It's a fair question." He looked straight at Elisa. "I saw a child drawing a sandwich on a napkin. I saw a mother struggling to keep her dignity, while the system failed her on every level. And I realized something simple. I have resources that could help. Not using them would be irresponsible. His answer didn't entirely convince Elisa, nor should it. Trust is built through actions, not words. The nutritionist, Dr. de Rivera, checked her notes. Our biggest issue isn't knowing what children need to eat. It's the lack of infrastructure, staff, and sustainable funding. One-off projects raise expectations that we can't maintain. John nodded. That's why I'm suggesting something structured, a 5-year commitment, to start. Funds in a specific account, managed by a mixed committee, school staff and community representatives. That part made Marlene raise her eyebrows. Community representatives. Parents of the students, people who truly understand what's missing. The school counselor, Mrs. Mills, spoke for the first time. That would be revolutionary. Giving families a real voice in projects of this scale. She smiled, genuinely impressed. It could work. For 2 hours, they discussed logistics, budgets, and physical space. John jotted notes in his notebook, occasionally asking questions but mostly listening. It was unfamiliar territory for him, educational, nutritional, and community issues. These women knew every challenge, every obstacle, every story of past failures. What do we call this project? Marlene asked when the preliminary details were set. John hesitated only a moment. Project Imagination. Why? Because it started with a girl imagining a sandwich when she had no real food. And because we want these children not to just imagine a better future, we want them to build it. When the meeting ended, Marlene walked John to the door. You understand this won't be easy, right? She asked when they were alone. You'll face resistance, skepticism, bureaucracy. I understand. And you still want to go ahead? John paused at the door, looking at the yard where, in a few minutes, children would come out for recess, where Sophie might sit alone with her drawn food, or maybe with the lunch he had brought yesterday. When I was 10, he said, my mother worked 3 jobs. Sometimes we had no food at home. I'd go to school and make up stories about fancy dinners that never happened. Marlene looked at him in surprise. That wasn't the kind of revelation she expected from a man like John Warren. What changed for you? She asked. An after-school program, with snacks and homework help. It seemed small, but it changed everything. It provided structure, security. He smiled slightly. It was the first place where someone told me I was smart enough to go beyond my circumstances. The principal nodded, understanding him better now. So, how do we start? We need someone to coordinate it. Someone who truly understands these families from the inside, not from above. Anyone in mind? John took a deep breath. This was the most important and hardest part of his plan. Rachel Blake. 3 days later, Project Imagination began to take shape. An unused room at the back of the school was designated as a temporary center. John hired a small team for quick renovations, painting, furniture, minor repairs. He chose bright colors, following teachers' suggestions about what would create a welcoming environment. Word spread quickly through the school community. Parents came to ask Marlene about rumors of free meals and after-school activities. Information was still preliminary, but hope was already stirring. The hardest part, however, was yet to come. John asked for Rachel's address again and, on a day of light rain, parked near her building, waiting. He rehearsed mentally what to say, how to explain his proposal without sounding condescending or hurting her pride. When he saw her returning from work, umbrella half broken against the drizzle, he gathered his courage and got out of the car. Rachel. She stopped, clearly surprised to see him standing in the rain. John, what are you doing here? We need to talk. It's important. Rachel studied him for a long moment, water dripping down her tired face. Finally, she nodded. Come up, but Sophie will be home in half an hour with the neighbor. In the tiny apartment, Rachel offered him a towel to dry his face and hair. There was no coffee this time, just water in simple cups. So, she asked after they sat down. John got straight to the point, explaining Project Imagination in detail, the objectives and the structure, the long-term commitment. What does that have to do with me? Rachel asked when he finished. I want you to be the coordinator. Rachel blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. What? I want you to lead the project. Be the link between the families and the school. Between real needs and real solutions. She laughed, a disbelieving, almost bitter sound. I'm not qualified for that, John. I don't have a college degree. I'm not a teacher or a nutritionist or a social worker. You have something much more valuable. What's that? Experience. Truth. That's worth more than any diploma. Rachel stood, clearly agitated. You don't understand. People like me don't get jobs like that. We don't run projects. We don't make decisions. Why not? Because the world doesn't work that way. Her voice rose, frustration evident. You can pretend not to see it, but I know how people look at me. A cleaning lady with no formal education, a single mum barely paying the bills. John stayed seated, looking her in the eye. Do you know why I want you in that position? Because you won't be afraid to say no when I suggest something that doesn't make sense. Because you know every detail of these families' lives. Because your respect has to be earned, not bought. Rachel stopped, studying his face. And if I fail? And if you don't try? How many Sophies will keep drawing sandwiches? The question hit Rachel like a silent punch. She sat down again, looking at her hands calloused from hard work, hands that had scrubbed, wiped and cleaned for years. How long has it been since you've had the chance to choose? John asked gently, to decide your own path. Tears shone in her eyes. Longer than I can remember. I'm offering you a choice, Rachel, not charity, a real job, with a real salary, real responsibilities. And what if you get tired of this project? When the novelty wears off? 5 years of guaranteed funding, with no chance of pulling out, a legal contract that not even I can break, and you'll have equal control over decisions. Rachel closed her eyes, breathing deeply. John could see the internal battle, the fear of the unknown versus the possibility of something better. The weight of responsibility against the promise of autonomy. When do I start? She finally asked, opening her eyes. You accept. A small smile appeared at the corner of Rachel's mouth, the first he'd seen. Sophie told me you were nice. She's rarely wrong about people. Before John could respond, the door opened and Sophie burst in, shaking the rain from her curly hair. Mom, look what... She stopped abruptly. Recognizing John, her eyes widened. You came back. John smiled at the girl. I came back, and your mom and I were talking about a very special project. Sophie looked back and forth between them, curiosity on her face. What project? Rachel kneeled in front of her daughter, taking the girl's small hands. A project based on your drawing, sweetie, so no child will have to imagine a sandwich again. Sophie frowned, processing the information. My sandwich drawing, John nodded. Project Imagination. What do you think? A huge smile lit up the girl's face. I helped make a project. You had the most important idea, Rachel answered, hugging her daughter. Over Sophie's shoulder, Rachel's eyes met John's. There was something new there, not gratitude, but something deeper, perhaps recognition, or maybe, for the first time in a long while, hope. As he watched mother and daughter embrace, John felt a certainty he hadn't experienced in years of business. For the first time, he was investing in something that truly mattered. Something that couldn't be measured in financial statements or quarterly reports. Something that started with a sandwich drawn on a napkin and could end with hundreds of lives changed. When he left the apartment that afternoon, the rain had stopped. The air felt clean, renewed. In the distance, clouds drifted away, revealing a sky that promised better days ahead. Rachel walked him to the door. John? He turned. Thank you for listening, really listening. It wasn't thanks for the job offer, he realized. It was acknowledgement of something rarer, a respect she cherished. Tomorrow at the school, he said. 9 o'clock. Rachel nodded, and for the first time, there was a light in her eyes that wasn't just determination to survive, but a desire to build something new. I'll be there. For the first time in a long while, perhaps the first time in her adult life, Rachel Blake felt she belonged to something bigger than her daily struggle, that she had a voice, that she could dream beyond the next rent payment, the next bill, the next meal. Project Imagination was just beginning. The path would be difficult, full of obstacles, but it already had firm roots. In Rachel's raw honesty, in Sophie's resilient creativity, and in the newly discovered determination of a billionaire who had learned to see beyond his privileged world. The seeds of transformation had been planted. Now it was a matter of nurturing them and watching them grow. Rachel woke up before the alarm. The sun was barely rising, but she was wide awake, stomach tight with a mix of anxiety and hope. Next to her, Sophie slept soundly, curls spread out on the pillow. First day, she whispered to herself. It wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity she never imagined possible, a chance to leave behind endless cleaning jobs and exhausting shifts, a chance to do something that truly mattered. She chose her clothes carefully, her best pair of jeans, no stains or rips, a simple blue blouse, clean and ironed. She didn't have many options, but she wanted to look presentable, professional. "Mum?" Sophie sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. "Is today your special day?" Rachel smiled, sitting next to her daughter. "Yes, sweetie. Today I start the project." "My project?" Sophie asked, pride obvious in her little voice. "Your project," Rachel confirmed, kissing her daughter's forehead. Project Imagination. She left Sophie at the neighbors, who would take her to school later. For the first time in years, Rachel would not take 3 buses to someone's house, scrubbing away what others had left behind. Today, she'd walk 15 minutes to the school where her daughter studied, where she now worked. The new project room still smelled of fresh paint. There were colorful tables, small chairs for the children, and a larger table for meetings. A makeshift kitchenette in the corner, with a microwave and a fridge. Posters on the walls showed drawings of food, inspired by Sophie's sandwich sketch. "Good morning, Rachel." John was there, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, so different from the executive she'd first met. "Ready?" She nodded, not feeling ready at all. Fear tightened her throat. That inner voice told her she didn't belong here. "What exactly do I do?" she asked, gripping her worn purse. "Today is about getting familiar with everything," John explained. "Principal Marlene will officially introduce you to the teachers. Then you'll stay here in the room to welcome the first families who are interested." Rachel took a deep breath. "What if they don't accept me?" John looked at her seriously. "They don't have to accept you. You need to prove to yourself that you belong here." The introductions were hard. Rachel felt the evaluating stares of the teachers. Some smiled, genuinely supportive. Others barely hid their skepticism. The math teacher folded her arms and asked directly, "What's your experience with elementary education?" Rachel felt her face burn. But before she could reply, Marlene stepped in. "Rachel brings the experience of someone who has lived the challenges we want to solve. She'll be our connection to the community." It wasn't enough to convince everyone. Rachel noticed the whispers as she left the teacher's lounge. The cleaning lady turned coordinator. Another project bound to fail. How long until the billionaire loses interest? She swallowed her wounded pride and followed Marlene to the project room. There, alone, she arranged the informational materials on the table, organized the registration forms, straightened the chairs, anything to keep her hands busy while she waited. The first hour went by in total silence. No one showed up. The second hour, a teacher came in for coffee, looked around and left without a word. The third hour, Rachel started to wonder if all of this wasn't a huge mistake. Maybe she should go back to cleaning jobs. At least she knew exactly what to do there. She knew her place. Then the door opened timidly. A woman entered, carrying a baby in her arms and holding the hand of a boy about 6 years old. She looked around, hesitant. "Is this where they have the meal program?" she asked in accented English. Rachel stood, smoothing her blouse nervously. "Yes, this is Project Imagination. Please, come in." The woman, Eleanor, Rachel soon learned, was an immigrant. She worked shifts at a factory. Her older son, Miguel, attended the school but often arrived hungry. "My husband left," Elena explained, bouncing the baby. "Now it's just me." It wasn't so different from Rachel's own story, and that's what she told her, offering not pity, but genuine understanding. "I understand. I'm raising my daughter alone, too." Elena's eyes lit up with the recognition of a shared experience. "How do you manage?" she asked, truly wanting an answer. Rachel didn't need to pretend. She didn't need to quote statistics or educational theories. She shared her own truth, The daily juggling, the exhaustion, the nights spent worrying about bills, but also the small victories, Sophie's hugs, the determination to keep going. When Elena left, she carried a completed registration form and something more valuable, the feeling that she had truly been heard. Then more families came. A grandmother raising 3 grandchildren, a young couple, both recently unemployed, a pregnant teenager with her worried mother. Rachel listened to each story. Not just the facts, where they lived, how many kids they had, what kind of help they needed, but what lay beneath the words, the unspoken fears, the nearly extinguished hopes, the deferred dreams. By afternoon, children started to show up. Sophie was one of the first, bringing 2 curious friends. "My mom works here now," she announced proudly. The kids looked at Rachel with admiration. They didn't see the woman who scrubbed other people's floors. They saw someone important, someone who had answers. "Will there be food every day?" a little boy asked. "Yes," Rachel confirmed, "and also activities after school." "Can my mom coming too?" a girl asked. "Of course. This place is for everyone." By the end of that first day, 17 families had signed up for Project Imagination. Not many, given the size of the school, but it was a start. John appeared late in the afternoon, while Rachel was organizing the forms. "How did it go?" he asked, sitting in one of the colorful chairs that looked absurdly small under him. Rachel thought before answering. "Difficult. Some teachers looked at me like I was an intruder, like I didn't belong." John nodded, understanding. "And what else?" A small smile touched Rachel's face. "Mothers told me things they probably wouldn't share with a social worker." The kids asked freely. "It was like," she searched for the right words, "we spoke the same language." "Because you do." Rachel understood what he meant. Her value wasn't in diplomas or technical jargon. It was in lived experience, in the same struggles, the same fears. "I realized something today," she said, putting away the last form. "I don't have to have all the answers. I just need to listen." Really listen. Being a listener. That was what she could offer. Something rare in a world where everyone talked but few truly heard. "Will you come back tomorrow?" John asked, as if there were any doubt. Rachel looked around the colorful room, at the drawings on the walls, at the space that in just one day was coming to life. "I will," she answered with certainty. Tomorrow and the day after. As she closed the room, Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a good kind of tiredness, the kind that came from doing something meaningful, not just surviving another day. Walking home with Sophie, hand in hand, she stood taller. She didn't have to fake being strong. She was strong. She always had been. But now, finally, others were starting to see it too. "Did you like your job, Mom?" Sophie asked, jumping in puddles along the way. Rachel smiled, a smile that reached her eyes. "I liked it, a lot." Project Imagination was still just a seed, but Rachel could feel its roots growing deeper, in her life, in the community. In the future, she was beginning to imagine not just for Sophie, but for all children who, like her, deserved more than just dreaming of sandwiches that didn't exist. 3 months after Project Imagination began, the small room at the back of the school was no longer big enough. The number of families involved had tripled. The daily meals now reached almost half the students, and the after-school workshops attracted children of all ages. John arranged the renovation of a larger area, the old storeroom used for obsolete materials. The space was transformed into a bright, spacious room with big windows, letting in lots of sunlight. Round tables for meals, shelves with books and games, a corner with colorful cushions for reading, and a small equipped kitchen where community volunteers took turns preparing healthy snacks. But the real transformation wasn't in the painted walls or new furniture. It was in the children's faces, especially Sophie's. That spring morning, Rachel watched her daughter from across the room. Sophie was seated at one of the low tables, completely absorbed in her drawing. Her curly hair fell over her focused face, and her tongue stuck out slightly, her sign of total concentration. "She's drawing all the time now," Elisa, Sophie's teacher, remarked, coming up beside Rachel. The two had developed an unexpected partnership in recent weeks. The initial skepticism had given way to genuine respect for Rachel's work. It's different from before, Rachel replied, without taking her eyes off her daughter. Before, she drew to fill a void. Now she draws to express something that's full. Elisa nodded, understanding. Have you seen her new drawings? They're not just food anymore. Rachel smiled. Sophie's artwork had changed dramatically. Instead of a solitary sandwich on a white napkin, there were now bright, colorful scenes, tables full of food, children holding hands, trees laden with fruit, hearts and smiling suns. It was as if her imagination, once limited by the need for food, had opened up to other worlds. She's rediscovering the world, Rachel said softly. From across the room, Sophie looked up and smiled when she saw her mom. She held up her drawing proudly. Rachel waved back, feeling that familiar wave of love and gratitude that always surprised her. I'll go see what she made, Rachel told Elisa, heading toward her daughter. Sophie slid the paper over as soon as Rachel approached. Look, Mom, it's our project. The drawing showed what looked like the room they were in, but with colors even brighter than reality. Children of different sizes and colors sat around round tables, eating and smiling. Adults, taller figures, served food or read stories. In the center, two figures stood out, a woman with curly hair like Sophie's and a tall man in a suit. Is that me and John? Rachel asked, pointing discreetly. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. You two made all this happen. Rachel felt a lump in her throat. It was true, in a way. The project was transforming the school, creating a space where kids could just be kids, free from adult worries about food or safety. Can I keep it to show John? Sure, Sophie said, already grabbing another sheet of paper. I'll make more. Rachel carefully placed the drawing in her folder. John now visited the school regularly, often unannounced, casually dressed and ready to take part in any activity, from serving lunch to reading stories. Staff no longer treated him with the distant reverence of the early days. For the children, he was simply John from the project, not the billionaire they saw in business magazines. In the following weeks, Sophie's drawings started appearing everywhere. Marlene, the principal, asked for permission to frame some and hang them in the school hallways. Others were reproduced in the project newsletters sent home with the kids. One of them, a circle of children holding hands around a bountiful table, became the official symbol of Project Imagination, printed on t-shirts worn by volunteers. Your daughter has a real gift, John remarked to Rachel one afternoon as they watched kids play in the newly funded playground. She captures the essence of what we're building here. Rachel watched Sophie running around with other children, her laughter reaching them even from a distance. She's always been observant, Rachel replied. Even when we had very little, she found beauty in small things. John smiled, recalling the original napkin with the sandwich drawing that now hung in his office, a constant reminder of how it all began. The kids are different now, he observed. It's not just about the food or the activities. It's something else. Affection, Rachel completed. Constant affection. Knowing there's a safe place, people who care, a reliable routine. John nodded, understanding. Over his years in business, he'd believed money could solve any problem. Now he saw that while resources were crucial, the real engine of change was something more subtle and powerful, the human capacity to truly care. The whole school feels different, he noted. Even the teachers seemed changed. It was true. The project's impact had spread far beyond the families directly served. Teachers reported better academic performance, fewer disciplinary issues, and greater parent involvement in school activities. The changes were gradual but undeniable, like a wave that started in the center and radiated outward. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that Sophie met Noah. Rachel was in a meeting with volunteers when Elisa brought a boy into the project room. He was small for his age, thin, with dark, frightened eyes that seemed to observe everything warily. He gripped the teacher's hand tightly, as if afraid to be left alone in that unfamiliar place. Rachel, this is Noah, Elisa introduced. He just transferred to our school. I thought the project could be good for him. Rachel knelt down to meet him at eye level. Hi, Noah. Welcome to our school. Have you eaten yet? The boy shook his head, not speaking. Want to join the other kids for a snack? We have grilled cheese today. Noah looked at the tables where several children were eating and chatting cheerfully. His eyes widened a bit, as though both attracted and intimidated by the scene. Maybe he'd prefer something calmer first, Elisa suggested, sensing his discomfort. Rachel nodded, understanding. "Sophie," she called, motioning to her daughter, who was drawing alone at a table in the corner. "Could you come here for a minute?" Sophie put down her pencils and skipped over to them. "This is Noah," Rachel said. "It's his first day at our school. Could you show him what we're doing here?" Sophie studied the new boy for a moment, then smiled. "Want to see my drawings?" Noah didn't answer, but his eyes lingered on the colorful papers on the distant table. "You can bring a snack for both of you," Rachel suggested. Sophie agreed enthusiastically, running off to get sandwiches and juice for them. Rachel and Elisa watched as Sophie gently led Noah to her table. He followed in silence, sitting next to her. Sophie pushed the sandwich and juice toward him, then resumed her drawing as if his presence were the most natural thing in the world. She didn't demand conversation or ask questions. She just let him observe. Gradually, Noah started eating. His eyes never left the paper where Sophie was creating a colorful scene, this time a huge rainbow over a school. "He doesn't speak much," Elisa said softly. "According to his family's social worker, he's had a tough time, lots of moves, a complicated home situation." Rachel nodded, all too familiar with how those simple words masked deep wounds. Children like Noah carried invisible burdens, scars that shaped every interaction and expectation. "Sophie will know how to handle him," she said confidently. "She's been on the other side herself." Throughout the afternoon, Rachel discreetly observed the two. Sophie occasionally spoke, explaining her drawings or offering more food, but didn't pressure him to respond. Noah remained silent but began showing signs of interest. His shoulders, tense at first, slowly relaxed. At one point, Sophie slid a blank sheet toward him along with some colored pencils. "You can draw with me," she offered casually. "Or just sit here." The boy hesitated, staring at the paper as if it was something strange and potentially dangerous. Then, slowly, he picked up a red pencil. His first line was timid, almost invisible. Sophie continued her own drawing without making a fuss. But Rachel noticed the slight smile on her face, the same one Rachel herself had when she achieved a small victory in the project. When parents started arriving to pick up their children, Noah's social worker appeared. A young woman with a tired expression, carrying a thick folder of paperwork. "How did he do?" she asked Rachel, watching the boy from afar. "He made a friend," Rachel answered simply, indicating the two kids drawing side by side in complete comfort. The social worker seemed genuinely surprised. "Noah usually takes weeks to get close to other children." Rachel smiled, recognizing the special kind of magic happening, children who recognized familiar pain, offering comfort without words or complex strategies. "Sophie has a special way about her," she explained. "She knows what it's like to feel invisible." When it was time for Noah to leave, he looked at Sophie with something close to panic in his eyes. The thought of leaving that safe little haven seemed terrifying. Demonstrating wisdom beyond her years, Sophie gently pushed her drawing toward him. "You can take it. And come back tomorrow." Noah picked up the paper carefully, like a fragile treasure. His lips moved slightly, forming what might have been, "Thank you," though no sound came out. Rachel watched with a tightness in her chest. That simple gesture, offering presence without demands, companionship without pressure, perfectly captured the project's core. Not just feeding bodies, but nurturing souls. Two small children giving each other comfort without words. A shared drawing. A safe space created not by walls and rooms, but by the invisible space between two hearts that recognized the same pain. Later that day, when John arrived, Rachel told him about Noah and Sophie. "That's what we built all this for," she concluded. "So kids can just be kids, so they can draw bright futures, not just pencil sandwiches." John smiled as he looked around the room, now nearly empty. The colorful drawings on the walls, the neat tables ready for the next day. "You know what amazes me most?" he asked. "The whole school has changed. I feel it in the halls, in the classrooms. Like something fundamental has shifted." Rachel agreed. The change didn't come just from regular meals or structured activities. It came from constant affection, reliable presence, the certainty that someone cared, one child at a time, one colorful drawing at a time. The image Sophie had drawn at first, a lonely sandwich on a white napkin, had transformed into something bigger and more beautiful. It hadn't just gained color, it had expanded to include other children, other stories, other possibilities. That, Rachel realized as she closed the project room that night, was the true miracle. Not John's money, not the renovated facilities, not the carefully planned programs. It was the human capacity to turn absence into presence, hunger into abundance, loneliness into belonging. One drawing at a time. 6 months after Project Imagination began, the school no longer looked the same. What had started as a simple initiative to provide food for hungry children had grown into something much larger, a movement that affected not just empty stomachs, but hearts and minds. The idea of a mural came up during one of the weekly family meetings. One mother, an artist by training but who had been away from painting for years due to the daily struggle to survive, suggested creating a permanent space for the drawings that had become the project's symbol. Something that lasts, she explained. Something that reminds everyone why we're here. Rachel took the proposal to John Raz, who immediately allocated funds for it. But Principal Marlene Carter, once so skeptical, chose the perfect spot. The white or empty wall in the main courtyard, visible to everyone who entered the school. If we're doing this, it should be where everyone can see it, she said with the practical determination that defined her. For 3 weeks, the work was done in secret, hidden behind colorful panels that only fueled the children's curiosity. Families took turns helping. Parents who were painters or construction workers offered their skills. Mothers who could draw guided the artist. Teenagers helped with finishing touches. Then, on a sunny Friday morning, the entire school gathered in the courtyard for the unveiling. Rachel watched the crowd with a mix of pride and nerves. Sophie was next to her, fidgety, holding Noah's hand firmly. Over the past months, he had become her constant companion. On the other side of the courtyard, John chatted with some parent volunteers, dressed casually as he always did now when visiting. There was no more distance. The billionaire who once stared in shock at a child drawing her lunch was now an integral part of the community. "Nervous?" John asked, coming over to Rachel. "A little," she admitted. "This is a big moment." "For all of us," he agreed. Marlene Carter stepped forward, and the crowd's chatter gradually subsided until only the occasional bird song in the courtyard's tree could be heard. "This school has existed for more than 50 years, the principal began, her strong voice carrying over the crowd. "Many of you studied here. Some of your parents did too. During that time, we've taught reading, math, and science. But in the last few months, we've learned something new. The importance of really seeing each child, each family, recognizing our needs without shame, building together." She nodded, and 2 parent volunteers removed the panels covering the wall. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The mural was stunning in its simplicity and power. Spanning the entire wall, it was a mosaic of dozens of children's drawings, reproduced and enlarged, preserving every imperfect line and vibrant color. There were children holding hands, families around tables, trees overflowing with fruit, colorful houses, animals, flowers, smiling suns. And in the center, larger than all the others, one black and white image, Sophie's original sandwich drawing on the white napkin. The simple image that had started it all. Beneath the sandwich, in carefully painted letters, was a simple but powerful phrase: "Here, nobody needs to pretend." Sophie squeezed Rachel's hand, her huge eyes fixed on the blown-up version of her drawing. "That's my sandwich, Mum," she whispered, a mix of surprise and pride. "Yes," Rachel replied, her throat tight with emotion. "It's where everything began," Marlene continued. "This mural represents our collective promise that this school will be a place where every child can be genuine, where hunger isn't a source of shame, but a problem we solve together, where struggles are shared, not hidden, where truth, even when it hurts, is embraced." John stepped forward, joining Rachel and Marlene. There was no planned speech for him. His presence was enough, a silent acknowledgement that even someone with so much privilege could be transformed by a genuine encounter with others' reality. Sophie Blake and her mother, Rachel, taught us something precious, Marlene went on. That strength isn't about pretending everything is fine when it's not. Real strength is in sharing our vulnerability and working together for real change. Rachel felt all eyes on her and Sophie. It wasn't the uncomfortable sensation of being judged, as in the early days of the project. It was a different type of recognition, respect for her journey, gratitude for her courage in turning a painful situation into something beneficial to the whole community. After the brief ceremony, families were invited to approach the mural. Children ran excitedly, pointing to their own drawings reproduced on the wall. Parents took pictures. Teachers explained the meaning of each image to visitors. Sophie led Noah by the hand straight to the mural's center, where her drawn sandwich now held a place of honor. The boy, who still spoke sparingly but communicated more through his own drawings, looked at his friend's work with awe. It was just a silly drawing, Sophie explained in childlike simplicity. Noah shook his head in disagreement. Then he pulled a small folded piece of paper from his pocket, one of his own drawings, and showed it to Sophie. It was a table surrounded by people, colorful food, and smiles. In the middle of the table, what looked like a sandwich. "Because of your," he said, his rarely heard voice making Sophie smile. John approached Rachel, watching the two children share their special moment in front of the mural. "Mission accomplished," he asked with a small smile. Rachel looked around, at the gathered families, at the now partnered teachers, at the mural celebrating truth instead of hiding it. At Sophie and Noah, two children who had found their voices and a sense of belonging. "We're just getting started," she answered, "but the foundation is solid." In the days and weeks that followed, the mural became the symbolic heart of the school. New students were taken there to learn about the community's values. Parents in difficult situations found courage in the simple words, "Here, nobody needs to pretend." Teachers used the space for lessons on empathy and community. On rainy days, children sat in a circle around it, sharing stories and snacks. It was more than a decorated wall. It was a visual manifesto, a collective statement that even hard truths could become the foundation for something beautiful and transformative. For Rachel, passing by the mural reminded her daily of how much their lives had changed. From a cleaning lady barely able to feed her daughter, to a respected coordinator of a project helping hundreds of people. From a mother crying alone at night, to a woman leading a community in change. For John, the mural represented a powerful revelation that his money was just a tool, not the solution itself. The true catalyst for change was the authentic encounter between people, the courage to see and be seen, and the daily decision to build something meaningful together. And for Sophie, the sandwich she once drew at the center of the mural was no longer a symbol of lack. It was the beginning of a story of abundance, not just of food, but of friendship, purpose, and possibilities. In the courtyard of that ordinary school, the Wall of Truth celebrated what was most precious about childhood, the ability to imagine better worlds and, with the right support, start building them. The Project Imagination Room stayed open until 7 o'clock at night, 3 times a week. It was a practical decision. Many parents worked hours that prevented them from picking up their kids earlier, but over time, it became something more meaningful, a safe space where entire families could spend a few hours away from the pressures of the outside world. On that rainy Thursday, Rachel was about to close up when she noticed a woman standing at the entrance, partially hidden by the shadows. She wore a worn coat, too big for her thin frame, and held the hand of a girl about 4 years old. Both were soaked from the rain, the child's hair plastered to her pale face. "Can I help you?" Rachel asked, walking over with a friendly smile. The woman hesitated, as if considering running away. Rachel knew that look well. It was the same one she had so often herself, the look of someone who needs help, but fears the judgment that usually comes with it. "I heard about the project," the woman finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone told me you help families." "Come in," Rachel invited, keeping her voice calm and casual. "It's cold out there." The small room was warm and welcoming. A few children were still finishing activities at the tables, while volunteers packed up for the next day. In the kitchenette, a large pot of soup gave off a comforting aroma. "I'm Rachel," she introduced, indicating a table away from the others where they could talk privately. "And you are—" "Hannah," the woman replied, sitting down cautiously, as if she feared taking up too much space. "This is my daughter, Lily." The little girl looked around with wide, alert eyes, watching the other children, the colorful drawings on the walls, the volunteers putting away the food. "Have you two had dinner?" Rachel asked, already knowing the answer. Hannah lowered her eyes on embarrassed. "We didn't have time today." Rachel nodded, not pushing. "We have soup and bread. Would you like me to serve you a bowl while we talk?" The relief on Hannah's face was evident. "That would be nice." As she served two generous bowls, Rachel discreetly observed the mother and child. Their clothes, though worn, were clean. The girl seemed well cared for, despite her obvious thinness. There were concerning signs. The way Hannah constantly checked the door, the way she flinched if someone walked too close, the bruises partly hidden by her coat sleeve. Rachel placed the food on the table and sat down. "Lily, would you like to color while your mom and I talk? We have crayons and paper over there." The girl glanced at her mother, silently asking permission. Hannah nodded, and Lily hurried to the activity table, where Sophie, who loved helping younger children, welcomed her warmly. Once Lily was occupied, Rachel turned her attention back to Hannah. "Are you new in the neighborhood?" Hannah picked up the spoon but didn't eat right away, as if she were afraid the food might disappear any second. "We arrived 3 days ago," she said. "We're temporarily staying at my cousin's place." Rachel waited, giving Hannah room to continue at her own pace. Months of experience had taught her that sometimes silent attention was the best way to communicate. After a few minutes, between hesitant spoonfuls of soup, Hannah began talking in fragments, like puzzle pieces that needed arrangement. "My husband, he wasn't always like this. It started after he lost his job. The drinking made it worse. I tried to endure it. For Lily. But last week," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The rest of the story was written in the bruises on her arms, in the fear in her eyes, in the small suitcase she clutched as if it contained all that was left of her previous life. Rachel didn't interrupt or judge. She just listened, truly listened, much as John had done for her months before, when she had desperately needed someone to see her. "I don't know what to do now," Hannah finally confessed, her voice breaking. "My cousin can't house us for long. I have no job, no money for an apartment. Lily needs school, stability. I should—" She swallowed hard. "Maybe I should go back." He promised he'd change, that he'd seek help. Rachel felt a knot tighten in her chest. How many women had heard that promise before? How many had gone back, only to find nothing had changed? "Hannah," Rachel said gently, choosing her words carefully, "what do you really want to do?" The question seemed to surprise Hannah. Maybe no one had cared about her desires in a long time. "I want to start over," she replied, tears finally escaping. "I want Lily to grow up without fear. I want a job, our own place, not having to look over my shoulder all the time." Rachel nodded, deeply understanding that wish. "When I first came here," she shared, "I was just as lost as you. Not for the same reason, but just as desperate. It was just me and my daughter against the world." Hannah raised her eyes, a mix of curiosity and despair. "What happened?" "Someone truly saw me," Rachel replied. "Not just my problems or poverty, but my strength, my potential, my humanity." She paused, looking at Sophie, who was patiently showing Lily how to mix colors. "This project was born from that moment, and now it's my turn to truly see you, Hannah." A spark of hope flickered in Hannah's eyes. "Can I help?" she asked timidly. I was an administrative assistant before Lily was born. I know how to type, organize files, answer phones." Rachel smiled, recognizing the pattern. People in need always wanting to offer something in return to keep their dignity. "We actually need someone with those skills," she replied. "But first, let's handle the basics. A safe place for you two to stay. Lily's school enrollment, immediate needs." Hannah lowered her head, tears flowing freely now. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Rachel placed her hand gently on Hannah's wrist, where the bruises began. "Because someone helped me when I needed it. Because your story doesn't end here, Hannah. And because here," she gestured to the entire project space, "you can start over, no one will judge." The simple words seemed to open a door Hannah believed permanently closed. She looked at Lily, now laughing at something Sophie said, her face lit by a smile that seemed rare. "I'm not sure I can do this," Hannah confessed. "Nobody does it alone," Rachel replied. "That's why we're here." When Hannah and Lily left 2 hours later, they had more than a plan. They had hope. Rachel had made phone calls, found them a temporary spot in a women's shelter, scheduled an appointment with the school's social worker, and secured Lily a place in the same class as Sophie. Small steps, but significant. The next day, John found Rachel organizing a stack of clothes and essential items for Hannah and Lily. "New family?" he asked, helping her sort through the donations. Rachel nodded and briefly told him the story, respecting Hannah's privacy but sharing the key points. "You know what I realized last night?" she asked, carefully folding a small blanket. "What?" "My story became a bridge," Rachel replied, looking around the room where so many families now found support every day. "A bridge that other women can cross, too." John smiled, understanding the depth of that statement. "It was never just about hunger, was it?" he asked, recalling how it all started. Rachel shook her head. "It never was. It's about being seen, being heard, preserving dignity even in the hardest circumstances." As they finished organizing the items for Hannah, Rachel reflected on how the circle was closing. She had once needed help, and now she could offer not just material support, but something infinitely more valuable, true understanding. The kind of understanding that only comes from having been on the other side. For Hannah, this was just the beginning of a difficult journey. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, seemingly insurmountable obstacles, but she wouldn't face them alone. And that, Rachel knew from personal experience, made all the difference. 3 weeks with no news. 3 weeks since John had last shown up at Project Imagination. At first, Rachel wasn't worried. He had a company to run. But 1 week became 3, and the silence grew heavy. Activities went on as usual. The funding was secure. The children got their meals, took part in workshops. Hannah already worked as the administrative assistant. Sophie and Noah had formed a small drawing club, but John's absence was felt, not just by Rachel, but by the kids who had grown used to his visits. "Where's John?" Sophie asked almost daily. "He's working," Rachel answered, unsure if it was true. It was Marlene who brought the news. The principal came in with a business newspaper, looking worried. "Have you seen this?" she asked, handing the paper to Rachel. The article took up half the page, with a photo of John surrounded by reporters. His expression was serious, his posture defensive. "Billion-dollar merger at risk. Investors question Warren's priorities." Rachel read quickly, negotiations that had taken years. Investors concerned about his distractions. Social projects taking his time. Falling stocks. The board demanding explanations. "Is this because of the project?" she asked, guilt tightening in her chest. "The sharks smell blood," Marlene replied. "For them, the time John spends here is time stolen from shareholders. But the money here is his personal money. It's not about the money, Rachel. It's about power and control. A billionaire who starts caring about hungry kids is a billionaire who might question other practices." After work, Rachel made a decision. She wore her best clothes, took the bus downtown, and soon found herself in front of the imposing Warren Enterprises building. John's assistant recognized her and let her wait in his office. The space occupied the entire top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, cutting-edge technology. A world far removed from Rachel's small apartment. What caught her eye was a small frame on the desk, the original napkin with Sophie's sandwich drawing. When John walked in, he seemed surprised to see her. More than that, he looked exhausted. Even his immaculate suit couldn't hide the deep circles under his eyes and his tense posture. "Rachel? Did something happen at the project? I came to see how you are." For a moment, John seemed ready to maintain his controlled facade, but then his shoulders slumped. "Rough days," he admitted. "I saw the newspaper. The merger's in trouble." 3 years of planning, hundreds of millions at stake," he said, turning to her. "Now the investors think I'm not committed enough. Because of the project. Because of the project. Because of my visits to the school. Because of interviews where I talked about social responsibility instead of profit." A tired smile appeared on his face. Apparently, that scares them. Rachel sat her, waiting, giving John the space he needed to continue, just as he'd done for her months ago. "They want me to go back to who I was," John continued, "the ruthless executive who cared only about the numbers, the one who never got distracted by humanity." "What do you want?" Rachel asked, echoing the question John had once asked her. "You know what's absurd? I built all this looking for something I only really found when I sat in a schoolyard, watching a girl draw a sandwich." "What?" "Purpose," John replied quietly. "A feeling that what I do truly matters." "What will you do now?" "Fight for the merger, calm the investors, play their game for now." "And the project?" "The project goes on, with or without their approval." Rachel stood up, moving closer. "I'm not asking about the money, John. I'm asking about you. The kids ask about you every day." John looked genuinely moved. "I didn't realize my presence mattered that much." "You built something beautiful, John. Something beyond financial statements and shares." She paused. "Come back. The school is your home now, too." Her simple words seemed to strike something deep in him. He turned to the window, but not before Rachel saw the moisture in his eyes. For a long moment, there was just silence between them, a silence of mutual understanding, of acknowledging their shared humanity despite their vastly different worlds. When John turned around again, there was new resolve in his tear-filled expression. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said simply. Rachel nodded, satisfied. The circle that began months ago, when John had listened to her in her time of need, now closed. This time she reminded him he belonged to something bigger than his corporate empire. John would return tomorrow, and together they would keep building something no stock price could quantify. A place where kids like Sophie no longer had to draw sandwiches on napkins just to survive. John kept his promise. The morning after his talk with Rachel, he was back at Project Imagination, dressed simply, as if he didn't bear the weight of a corporate empire on his shoulders. In the months that followed, he found a rhythm, 3 mornings a week at the school, the rest of his time at the company. Balancing both worlds wasn't easy. Investors kept questioning his priorities. The merger inched forward under tense negotiations. Some board members threatened to demand his resignation, but John didn't back down. Instead, he began integrating both sides of his life. He invited executives to visit the project, showing how it was transforming the school and community. He brought lessons from the project into his business decisions. He openly questioned corporate practices he'd never thought about before. The corporate crisis didn't vanish, but his perspective on it changed completely. That Thursday afternoon, the project was quieter than usual. A light rain kept the children indoors, scattered in small groups around the round tables. In one corner, Rachel taught Hannah how to use the new family registration system. In another, volunteers prepared school supply kits to distribute. John sat at an empty table, observing the environment he had helped create. It still amazed him how that space, once just a storage room, had turned into something so vibrant and meaningful. "Can I sit here?" The familiar little voice brought him back to the present. Sophie stood beside him, a colorful folder under her arm. Noah a few steps behind as usual, acting like a shy guardian. "Sure," John replied with a smile. "Both of you." Sophie sat eagerly while Noah took a seat with his usual discretion. The two were an odd pair. She was outgoing, he was reserved, but their bond was undeniable to anyone who saw them together. "It's been a while since you told us stories," Sophie said, opening her folder. "Have you been busy saving your company?" John laughed, surprised by her awareness. "How do you know about that?" Sophie shrugged with the casualness of someone explaining the obvious. "My mom said you had some big problems to solve, and I heard teachers talking about a newspaper saying your company was in trouble." "Word gets around fast, huh?" "Everyone here likes you," she said simply. "We were worried." Something about that statement touched John deeply. The idea that these people, kids, teachers, families struggling with their own challenges, were concerned about him and his problems was surprisingly moving. "It's getting better," he assured her. "How about you? How's the drawing going?" Sophie's eyes lit up. She began pulling out sheets of paper from her folder, spreading them across the table. Noah leaned in slightly, his quiet way of showing interest. "This week we made drawings of families," she explained, showing him colorful depictions of all kinds of families. "The teacher said family isn't just who shares our blood, but who takes care of us." John studied them, admiring how much Sophie's artistic skills had grown. Her lines were more confident, her colors richer and more complex. There were unexpected details for someone so young: facial expressions, small significant objects, elaborate backgrounds. "Noah drew too," Sophie added, nudging her friend gently. "Show him." Hesitating, Noah slid a sheet of paper across the table. It showed what appeared to be himself, holding hands with a woman John recognized as the boy's social worker. Beside them were Sophie and Rachel. "That's really good, Noah," John praised sincerely. The boy didn't speak, but the slight blush on his cheeks and the sparkle in his eyes said it all. "I saved the best for last," Sophie announced with a mischievous grin. She pulled out one final piece, larger than the others on thicker paper. She carefully placed it in front of John. The drawing showed a large round table similar to the ones in the project room. Seated around it were four clearly recognizable figures: Sophie with her curls, Noah with his serious face, Rachel with her kind smile, and John, identifiable by the suit he occasionally still wore. On the table was a colorful feast: fruit, sandwiches, cakes, juices. The four figures were holding hands, forming a circle. Above them, a big yellow sun beamed rays in every direction. In each corner of the paper, small red hearts completed the scene. It was a simple image, but powerful in its message: togetherness, belonging, shared abundance. "It's for you," Sophie said, pushing the drawing closer, "to put next to my old sandwich." John felt his throat tighten. "It's beautiful, Sophie. Perhaps why this one in particular?" The girl tilted her head slightly, thinking over his question with serious intent. "Before, I used to draw sandwiches only," she explained with a startling wisdom. "Now I draw what actually exists." What actually exists? No more fantasies born of hunger, no more imaginary meals sketched on napkins. Instead, a tangible reality of a shared table, real food, genuine connections. John studied the drawing again, noticing details he had missed. The way the four figures were the same size despite their age and physical differences in real life. How the table was perfectly round, with no head or special seat. How they were all smiling, connected not just by the hands they held, but by invisible lines of affection and mutual respect. "Do you like it?" Sophie asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice at John's prolonged silence. "I love it," he replied, voice a bit hoarse. "It's the most beautiful picture I've ever received." Satisfied, Sophie beamed. She nudged Noah, and the two quietly slipped off their chairs to join other kids setting up a board game at a nearby table. John remained, alone with the drawing, gently touching it to feel the texture of the paper and the slight roughness where the crayon layers overlapped. Rachel approached, looking over his shoulder at the artwork. "Another gift from our resident artist?" she asked, smiling. John nodded, still absorbing the impact of Sophie's words. "Now I draw what exists." "She told me something extraordinary," he said, finally finding his voice. "That she used to draw imaginary sandwiches, and now she draws what's real." Rachel sat next to him, looking at her daughter across the room. Sophie was bent over the board game, patiently explaining the rules to Noah, her arm draped protectively over his shoulders. "Children always show us the truth, don't they?" Rachel said, "without filters or unnecessary complications." "The truth," John repeated thoughtfully. "You know what I realized looking at this drawing?" "What?" "That I never saved anyone here. Not you, not Sophie, not any other family." He smiled, a deep understanding finally crystallizing in his mind. "In fact, I was saved, too." Rachel didn't seem surprised by his revelation. She just nodded, as though confirming something she had known for a while. "Saved by each other," she gently corrected him. "That's how it works when it's real." John folded the drawing carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, near his heart. He knew exactly where he would put it, beside the original napkin in his office, the before and after, the hunger and the abundance, the loneliness and the connection. Watching the kids playing, the parents chatting, the volunteers working side by side, John felt a calm certainty settle in his chest. This place, these people, this growing community, it wasn't a side project to his real life, nor a good deed to offset years of unbridled ambition. It was simply the truest thing in his life now. As Sophie's drawing so clearly showed, they had formed a sort of family. Diverse, imperfect, bonded not by blood or duty, but by choice and a shared purpose. And that, John finally understood, could never be graphed in financial statements or performance charts. It was something only captured by the simple wisdom of a child who once drew imaginary sandwiches and now drew shared tables. Now she drew the truth. A year after Project Imagination started, the transformation was undeniable. What began with a napkin drawing of a sandwich had expanded well beyond the school walls, becoming a model studied and replicated in other communities. The original room no longer held all the activities. They had moved to a small annex built for the project, complete with a professional kitchen, a library, a computer room, and a courtyard where community gardens thrived under the care of the families themselves. One Friday afternoon, while the children staged a play they'd written themselves, John watched discreetly from the back of the room. He no longer needed to be at the center. The project had a life of its own now, sustained by dozens of volunteers, parents, teachers, and staff. Rachel managed it all with a confidence unimaginable a year ago. The same woman who had once hesitated to accept the coordinator position, fearing her lack of formal education, now spoke at conferences for educators on bridging the gap between schools and vulnerable communities. Her lived experience, as John once called it, had become a form of wisdom no academic course could teach. On the improvised stage, Sophie led a group of younger kids in a song. Her clear, steady voice filled the space, with no trace of shyness or insecurity. Next to her, Noah, who had become her constant companion, helped with the stage props. The boy who had once arrived silent with fear now spoke softly but with confidence, especially around Sophie. "They've grown, haven't they?" Marlene commented, stepping up beside John. The principal, once so skeptical of his intentions, was now one of the project's biggest advocates. Under her leadership, the school had become a community center that not only educated children, but also empowered entire families. "In every way," John answered with a smile. In the front row, Hannah watched the performance with tears of pride. Her daughter, Lily, once so timid, was now shining as a talking tree. Hannah herself, after months as the project's administrative assistant, had secured a scholarship to complete her college education. The fear that once dominated her eyes had given way to a peaceful determination. "Have you seen the latest numbers?" Marlene asked, showing John a folder. He nodded. The data were impressive. A 32% increase in attendance, parent participation tripled, dropout rates cut in half, grades were up in every subject. More importantly, the emotional well-being indicators, something many schools didn't even measure, showed kids were happier, more connected, more confident. "It's not just about the food," Marlene noted. "It never was." "Sophie figured that out before any of us," John remarked. "When she told me she used to draw imaginary sandwiches, and now she draws what's real." The wisdom of that little girl continued to guide the project. It was about making real what had once only been imagined: safety, belonging, dignity. When the show ended, amid enthusiastic applause, the children ran to their parents. Sophie leaped into Rachel's arms, while Noah got a warm hug from his new adoptive family, a pair of teachers who had taken him in 6 months earlier. "John!" Sophie shouted when she spotted him, dashing over. "Did you see our play? We wrote it all ourselves." "I did," he said, crouching to her level. "It was amazing." "I have news," she whispered in his ear as if sharing a valuable secret. "I'm going to be an artist when I grow up, and Noah's going to be an architect. He wants to build homes for people who don't have any." "That sounds like a perfect plan," John responded, genuinely moved by the dreams now possible for those children. Later, as he helped tidy up the room after the show, John looked at the mural of truth, now expanded to 3 entire walls, filled with new drawings, photographs, and messages from families. In the center, protected by special glass, Sophie's original sandwich drawing remained, reminding everyone where it all started. At his company headquarters, the merger had finally gone through, though with significant changes to the initial terms. John had insisted on social responsibility clauses that would have been unthinkable before. Some investors left. Others, surprisingly, stayed, intrigued by this new approach. The corporate power structure remained the same, but small transformations were budding, like green shoots after the first spring rain. In his office, the original napkin with Sophie's sandwich drawing hung on a prominent wall next to her second drawing, the 4 figures holding hands around the table. Any visitor immediately noticed these 2 simple pictures among the prestigious certificates and awards. Many asked about them. John always told the full story, leaving nothing out. How he'd found a girl drawing her lunch on a napkin, how that moment had changed his understanding of privilege and responsibility, how he'd learned real transformation happens when people from different worlds meet with mutual respect and a shared mission. Some got it, others didn't, but the story kept being told. At the end of that special day of performances, Rachel and John sat outside in the now empty courtyard. Most families had gone home. Volunteers were finishing cleanup. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Sometimes I wonder where we'd be if you hadn't seen Sophie that day," Rachel mused. John pondered. Probably in some board meeting, still believing success was measured only by numbers. And I'd still be cleaning houses, trying to scrape by for the rent. And Sophie would still be drawing sandwiches on napkins. They fell silent, contemplating the weight of those alternate realities, the worlds that could have been but weren't. "The whole world hasn't changed," Rachel pointed out, glancing beyond the school walls to a city still wrestling with inequality, broken systems, lingering injustices. "No," John agreed, "but their world changed." He pictured Sophie and Noah on the stage, Hannah rebuilding her life, the dozens of families who had found support and dignity, children now dreaming of futures they once believed impossible. "And that," Rachel smiled, with the calm certainty of someone who knows the true value of what they've built, "is enough." As the project's lights went out that evening, one simple truth remained illuminated. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins with the smallest of gestures. A look that truly sees, a hand reaching out, a shared sandwich. And it continues day by day, through the constancy of those who know changing the entire world might be impossible, but changing one world at a time, that anyone can do. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.